I love stories and storytelling. And I've recently thought, hey, there are many very good stories that don't get enough airtime. We've heard lots of stories from Brothers Grimm, maybe Greek stories of those Greek gods on Olympus, and maybe Hindu stories. But how many Buddhist stories have you heard? Yes, I've actually heard many very good Buddhist stories, and they don't get enough sharing. So I've decided, let me do it. Hope you help me out by sharing them out to the world. So I'm actually just going to do my own interpretation and telling of the stories, since most of the times the stories are in rather archaic formal language, and this kind of style sometimes prevent them from getting endeared to young children and even adults, because they are very academic, and who wants very religious academic language styles in a nice story. So these stories with very nice morals to them and a lot of lessons, and sometimes even very intrinsic humor, very mild intrinsic humor, will actually entertain a lot of people if they were in layman or me, laywomen style. So forgive the very casual nature of the storytelling. I would just preface this. Please do not get offended, especially since they have roots in Buddhism, because many of them are stories from the Buddha's times. So please do not take offense, especially if I am not able to pronounce certain names, certain Pali names well. The main reason for this is to enjoy the story. All right, so let's get into it and let's talk about a sin story. So in Dhammapada, there's this section where there are twin verses. So these verses tend to have some relationship with each other. They tend to mirror or oppose each other. And, and these verses actually come about uh, due to a certain occurrence which became actually some anecdote. Okay. So anecdotal wise, let's start off with this. It says, mind precedes all knowables, mind's their chief. Mind made are they. If with a corrupted mind one should either speak or act, dukkha follows caused by that, as does the wheel the ox's hoof. So this one is actually saying dukkha or suffering will follow if you actually have some evil intention or evil thought. Because this is what is in your head rather than what is external. And this is illustrated by a story of a blind monk. Okay, so on one occasion, there was this monk called Cakkhupala. I hope I pronounced it right. This blind monk went to visit the Buddha and spent time at the Buddha's monastery. This is actually a monastery where Buddha was residing and actually uh, giving his teachings to the monks as well as whoever was visiting. So this blind monk was actually in meditation, walking meditation. He was walking and he trotted upon some insects, and unfortunately he killed them. He was just blindly walking by, he couldn't see them, and because he was so into his meditation, he did not realize it. Other monks saw this when they saw the dead insects. They actually have rather negative thoughts about this blind monk. So they went to tell the Buddha, like, oh teacher, did you know that this blind monk killed several insects? We saw dead insects all over his bedroom floor, all, just around where he was walking. So they were expecting the Buddha to say something, maybe ask the blind monk to repent or whatever. But instead, the Buddha said, this blind monk is actually an arhat. An arhat is someone who has actually achieved enlightenment. And based on my understanding, an arhat is someone who actually achieved enlightenment through some guidance or teaching. Unlike the Buddha himself, who actually achieved enlightenment through self realization. So, this is my understanding. All right, so the Buddha said, this monk is already an arhat. It is impossible that he had evil intention and he was so cruel as to want to kill those insects intentionally. He wouldn't kill any living being intentionally. So the other monks were actually quite surprised. Uh, they actually asked the Buddha, really, we did not know that this blind monk visiting us is an arhat. Why, teacher, is this monk blind? Because usually the layman's thoughts are someone who can achieve such high level of cultivation to achieve enlightenment, they would have a lot of merits and blessings. So they were perhaps a bit surprised that this person was, quote unquote, a bit disabled. So the Buddha actually told this story. He actually was a physician in one of his previous existence. And this physician had intentionally caused someone, a female patient of his, to be blind. Why would he do that? So it turned out it was this way. This blind monk, in one of his previous existence, i.e., one of his past lives, he was a physician and he had a female patient who was actually getting a bit blind. Her eyesight was worsening, and she went to him and said that if he could cure her of blindness and make her eyes good as they were before, she would be his slave. Not only her, even her children would be his slaves. So I guess she was pretty desperate and she made this vow. So as time progressed, he cured her of her blindness. And her eyes were almost as good as new. However, she was afraid of being his slave and she regretted her vow to make herself and her children his slave. So she actually lied and told him that her eyes were getting worse and worse, rather than the fact that they were actually completely healed. He knew this, and as a form of revenge, perhaps, he purposely made her blind by giving her an ointment. And therefore, he suffered the consequence of this ill intention. He purposely, knowingly, with full intention, with full ill intention, gave her the ointment to make her blind, totally blind. And therefore, he suffered several existences as a blind man. And perhaps a blind woman as well in some lives. Yes, but in this particular story, he was a blind man, a blind monk. So this was his karma.